Good morning, everybody. Hope you're well today on this fine sunny morning that we're having in Newcastle at the moment. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Matt. I'm going to be guiding you through HR advice and real scenarios, real advice. I'm going to be joined today by some very special guests as well from Advisor Plus. They're going to be sharing their knowledge and advice on real world HR situations that small businesses face nowadays and some actionable solutions to overcome them also. Before we introduce ourselves though and get started, just going to run through some housekeeping, just so you know how things work. So if you've been here before, you'll know the rules. If not, essentially, these are the rules. Your microphone is muted automatically, so don't worry. If you need a cough or sneeze, we are not going to hear you whatsoever. You'll not interrupt anything that we're about to do. There's also handouts attached to today's webinar. There's a colour one and a black and white one, just in case you want to print off and write in the old-fashioned way like I do. Again, send us your questions during this webinar. If we can't answer them during the time that is allotted, which is 45 minutes today, then we'll be in touch with you directly afterwards. Without further ado, let's have a look at today's speakers and get on with the introductions. As I said, my name is Matt. I work at Sage and I am a learning facilitator. So this is what I do on a day-to-day basis. Katie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, Matt. Yes, I'm Katie. I've worked in HR and employment law for 25 years now. I've been an advisor with Advisor Plus for 3 years, and that's supporting customers with their ER issues and coaching customers managers. So before this, I've worked in private practice, firms of solicitors in-house, for companies and for consultancies, and that's been providing advice, consultancy services, and as a litigator, representing clients in mediations, arbitrations, at early conciliation, at the Employment Tribunal and Employment Appeal Tribunal. I've also delivered mock training, mock tribunals and legal updates.
Hi, good morning. Thanks, Matt. I'm Sam. I've worked in HR for over 20 years and worked with several business types in several roles throughout the years, covering everything from administration through to senior advisor and operational management. I'm qualified level 3 and level 5 with the CIPD, and I joined Advisor Plus in 2019. My role as an HR technical consultant now involves supporting the operational advisory teams with complex and high-risk scenarios, upskilling and training the teams.
Superb, thank you both. So I did briefly mention what the plan is going to be today, but here's a bit more on what our experts will be focusing on. Now we're going to be covering an employee falling ill while taking holidays, delayed return to work after travelling abroad due to disruptions, how employers can reasonably manage time off during summer or busy periods, and also some expert advice on what makes an effective leave management process. Now, as always, we've got the slides, as I mentioned, available via the handout option. And later on today, we'll be sharing a follow-up email with the recording of this section as well. So you can rewatch it or even share it with colleagues if you need to. But again, without further ado, let's get started. So Sam, I think we'll start with something that pretty much all employers come across, which is holidays. Could you start us off with some of the basics of holidays?
Yes, of course. Thanks, Matt. We're going to talk about something that can be a bit of a grey area for employees and employers alike. So let's start with some basics. Every employee is entitled to paid holiday, also known as annual leave. In the UK, the statutory minimum is 5.6 weeks per year, which includes bank holidays. So that's 28 days for someone working a 5-day week. Of course, some employers offer more than this, but 5.6 is the legal minimum. Now, holiday entitlement builds up over time. It accrues monthly, and yes, it continues to accrue even when someone is off sick, on maternity leave, or on other types of statutory leave. Being off doesn't stop your holidays from building up. So what happens when someone has booked annual leave and then they become unwell and submit a fit note covering that same period? So let's walk through that scenario. Imagine your employee has booked a week off in July, and just before the holiday starts, they fall ill and send in a fit note from their GP that covers that same week. As an employer, what do you do? And the key thing here is that the holiday and sick leave are treated separately. If an employee is genuinely unwell during their booked holiday, they have the right to convert that holiday into sick leave and take the holiday at another time. The idea is that the holiday is meant to be restorative. If someone's ill, they're not getting the benefit of rest and relaxation. So they shouldn't lose their holiday entitlement just because they happened to be off sick during that time. In this employee's case, if they submit a valid fit note and they want to treat this time as sick leave rather than annual leave, they can. So this means they'll receive statutory sick pay or company sick pay if applicable for that period, and the holiday period will be reinstated and they can rebook that at another time. Now, this doesn't happen automatically, and the employee needs to let their employer know that they want to treat the time as sick leave. It's not enough just to submit the fit note. They need to make it clear that they're not taking the holiday as planned. And from the employer's side, it's reasonable to ask for a valid fit note covering the period, clear communication from the employee, and ideally some notice. For this, of course, it should be remembered, illness doesn't always come with a warning.
And with that in mind, what's reasonable for the employer to do?
Well, first, they should acknowledge the fit note and confirm whether the employee wants to convert the holiday to sick leave. And if the employee does and the fit note is valid, the employer should cancel the annual leave for that period, record the time as sick leave, and allow the employee to rebook their holiday later. It's also reasonable for the employer to update their records and payroll accordingly. If the employee was due to receive holiday pay, that may need to be adjusted to reflect sick pay instead. Now, what if the employee doesn't say anything and they've submitted a fit note, but they haven't mentioned the holiday? A reasonable response would be for you to reach out to them to clarify the situation. It's not safe to assume either way. And a quick check-in with them to say you've received a fit note, and to check whether they'd like to treat the booked holiday as sick leave is fine. Let's also touch on timing. If the employee becomes ill before their holiday starts and they notify the employer, it's straightforward. They can cancel the holiday and take the sick leave. But what if they become ill during the holiday? Well, they can still convert those days that they were sick into sick leave. But again, they need to notify the employer as soon as possible. And they need to provide a fit note if the illness lasts more than 7 calendar days. And what about proof? Well, for short-term illness, 7 days or fewer, a self-certification is fine, but for anything longer than that, a fit note is required. Employers can reasonably ask for the support to support the change from holiday to sick leave. And from the employee's side, it's important to understand that they're not losing the holiday period if they're genuinely unwell. They need to communicate clearly with their employer, and they need to provide evidence such as a fit note. And from the employer's side, it's about being fair, consistent, and following the law. You don't want to penalise someone for being ill. And you also need to manage leave records and pay accordingly. So let's wrap up this section with a quick summary. If an employee is sick during booked holiday, they can ask to treat this time off as sick leave. They'll need to provide a fit note for the illness that lasts more than 7 days. The employer should cancel the holiday, record the time as sick leave, and allow the employee to rebook the holiday later. Clear communication between both sides is key. And just a reminder, holiday is meant to be restorative. If someone's unwell, they're not getting that benefit. So the law protects their right to take time off properly when they're not well enough to enjoy it.
Thank you, Sam. And Katie, is there any other scenarios that you'd like to mention on that line?
Yes, thank you very much. So this one is becoming pretty common these days, especially with international travel being so popular. And that's what happens when an employee goes abroad on holiday but doesn't make it back in time for work, unfortunately. So maybe the reason for that was that their flight was delayed, maybe it was cancelled, maybe they missed a connection or got stuck due to weather, strikes, or other kinds of disruptions. Whatever the reason, though, they're not back when they expected. And now you, as the employer, are left wondering what's reasonable to do. So first, okay, travel delays do happen. We accept that. It's frustrating for everybody, and especially the employee who's stuck in an airport somewhere trying to get home. So the situation needs to be treated with empathy and approached in that way. It isn't about somebody choosing to extend their holiday. It's about circumstances beyond their control. Now, from an employment perspective, the key question is, how should this time be treated? So let's look at this scenario. Your employee went to Spain for a week. They were due back on Sunday and expected to therefore be back at work on Monday morning. But in this scenario, on Sunday night, they message you to say that their flight's been cancelled due to bad weather and the airline has rebooked them on a flight for Tuesday. So now they're not going to be in work on Monday and maybe Tuesday too, depending on when they land. So what's reasonable for you as the employer to do? So the first thing reasonably to do is acknowledge the situation and ask for further details from your employee. You can ask for confirmation of the flight cancellation and the new travel arrangements. And this isn't about doubting them, it's about keeping clear records and understanding how long they're going to be away. And once you've got those facts, you'll then need to decide how to treat that absence. Because the delay isn't due to illness and it's not part of the employee's booked holiday, it's technically unauthorised absence, but that doesn't mean it has to be treated harshly in that way. So there are a few reasonable options you can consider for this. Number one would be annual leave. So if the employee has holiday entitlement remaining, you could agree to treat those 2 extra days as annual leave, or however many days there are. This is often the simplest solution, especially if the delay is only a day or two. The second option is unpaid leave. So that's appropriate if they've used up all the holiday or if it's something they prefer. Or you could also agree to unpaid leave for those missed days through mutual agreement. That can't be imposed on them without discussion though. And then thirdly, an option can be making up time. So quite simply, in flexible roles, the employee might be able to offer to make up that time later. That could be through extra hours, weekend work, shifting their schedule, for example. And that really works best when the absence is fairly short and the role does allow for that flexibility.
So what if the delay stretches longer, let's say, several days?
Yeah, so at that point, it's reasonable to ask for more detailed evidence from your employee. You might want to see flight confirmations, rebooking details, or even hotel receipts if they've had to stay longer. And again, it's not about mistrust. The emphasis is about managing the impact on the business and keeping things fair for everybody. Let's also look at communication around this. It is reasonable to expect the employee to stay in touch. So if they're stuck abroad, they should be updating you regularly on what's happening. If they go silent, if they don't respond, if they don't show up when they're expected to, then that's a different issue. In that case, it would be reasonable to treat that absence as unauthorised until you hear otherwise from them. It might even trigger your absence management process, depending on your company policy about that. But assuming they've communicated clearly and they've provided evidence, the situation should ideally be handled with flexibility and ultimately fairness.
Yeah, thank you, Katie. I think it's also important that we touch on pay as well. So I imagine you get a lot of questions on that kind of side of things as well.
We certainly do, absolutely. So if those extra days are treated as annual leave, then the employee would be paid as they would be normally. If it's unpaid leave, then of course they wouldn't receive any pay for those days. And if they're making up time, then you would need to agree how this affects their pay and hours, depending on what's happened. And then finally, should you be considering disciplinary action as a result? So generally speaking, if the delay is genuine and the employee has communicated well, then disciplinary action wouldn't be appropriate. But if they fail to notify you, they haven't returned when expected, and they haven't provided an explanation, then that's a different story. And in those cases, it is reasonable to follow your absence or your conduct procedures. So wrapping up, let's summarise what's reasonable for an employer to do when an employee doesn't return from holiday on time due to travel delays. 1, ask for clear communication and evidence of the delay. 2, discuss how the extra time will be treated, so unpaid leave, annual leave, or time made up later. 3, keep records of absence and any agreements that you make. 4, avoid disciplinary action unless there's a lack of communication or evidence of something untoward. And then finally, be fair, consistent, and empathetic, especially when the situation is fully out of the employee's control.
Absolutely right, that Katie. It's also a good idea to include guidance on travel-related delays in your absence or holiday policy, and that way everyone knows what to expect and how to handle it if it happens.
Thank you, Sam. And I know we're at that busy time in the year when it comes to holidays and requests, etc. So on that point, do you have any advice for employers?
Well, yes, we're right in the middle of the school holiday season, aren't we? And for many workplaces, this is when annual leave requests start piling up. Parents are juggling childcare, people are heading off on long-awaited holidays, and teams are stretched quite thin. So let's look at how employers can reasonably manage the annual leave during these busy periods, especially when multiple employees want time off at the same time and the business still needs to run smoothly. The school holidays are a peak time for annual leave, and it's understandable parents want to spend time with their children, and many families plan their holidays around this window. But from an operational point of view, it can be very challenging. You might have half your team requesting the same week off, and suddenly you're facing coverage issues, project delays, or customer service gaps. So what's reasonable for the employer in these situations? First, it's important to remember that while employees have the right to paid annual leave, they don't have an automatic right to take it whenever they choose. Employers can refuse leave requests if there's a valid business reason, like too many people off at once or critical work that needs to be done. That said, it's all about balance. The goal isn't to say no to everyone, it's to manage leave fairly, consistently, and with empathy.
So how do employers do that? Have you got any tips for them that they can take on board now?
Yes, absolutely. Firstly, have a clear annual leave policy. Your policy should explain how far in advance the leave can be requested, which should be at least the minimum statutory notice, how leave is approved, any limits on how many people can be off at one time, and how priority will be decided if multiple requests clash. So under employment legislation, the notice period for wanting to book annual leave is twice as much time as the length of the holiday. So for example, if you want to take 5 days leave, the minimum amount of notice would be 10 days before the leave starts. Likewise, the employer can decline the leave, but they must give at least as much notice as the length of the leave itself. So if the leave is for 5 days, the notice to decline the request should be received 5 days beforehand. And having this in writing helps to avoid misunderstandings and gives management something to refer to when making decisions. Secondly, first come, first served versus rotational fairness. Some employers operate on a first come, first served basis, and that can work, but it can also lead to the same people getting the same time off in prime weeks of the year. Another approach is rotational fairness. For example, if employee A had the last 2 Augusts off, maybe this year it's someone else's turn, and this can help spread the opportunity and avoid any resentment. Thirdly, encourage early planning. The earlier employees submit their requests, the easier it is to plan. You might even set a deadline for summer leave requests. Say all requests for July and August must be submitted by the end of May, and this gives time to assess coverage and make decisions. Another one is to use a shared calendar or leave tracker. Visibility is key, and if everyone can see who's off and when, they're less likely to try and plan the same time off together. Also helps managers spot potential clashes early. So what do we do when we can't approve everyone's request? And this is where communication matters. If you have to say no, explain why. Maybe there's a big client deadline or too many people are already off. Be transparent and where possible offer alternatives. And if someone's request is linked to childcare or a special occasion, try to be a little flexible. Maybe they can work remotely for part of the week or maybe adjust their hours temporarily. Even small accommodations can make a big difference. Let's also touch on partial approvals, because sometimes you can't approve the full request, but you can approve part of it. For example, someone asks for 2 weeks, but you can only manage 1. That's still better than a flat out no, and it shows you're trying to meet them halfway. Now, if someone books a holiday before getting approval, ideally your policy should state that leave must be approved before travel is booked. But if someone goes ahead and books it without confirmation and you genuinely can't approve the time off, they may have to change their plans.
Yeah, definitely. And I've heard of that before, where they've booked the holiday and kind of used that as an excuse that they must then be allowed that time off from work. But that's not always possible, nor is it kind of the right way round to do things, I suppose.
Yes, Matt, exactly. Jump in here then. So it's not a pleasant conversation to have with an employee when that's the situation, but it is important to be consistent with employees. If you bend the rules for one person, others might expect the same. And let's also consider team responsibility. So encouraging employees to coordinate with their teammates so that they know if their colleague is already off that week, for example, it might be better for them to choose a different time or a different date. And this kind of peer-to-peer planning can ease the pressure on managers and foster a more collaborative culture. And then finally, let's not forget the importance of rest. Annual leave, after all, isn't just a perk, it's absolutely essential for employee well-being. People need time to recharge, especially during busy seasons like the summer. So whilst it's important to manage leave carefully, it's also equally important to support people in actually taking it. So for this section, I think there are a few key takeaways. Firstly, employers have a right to paid annual leave, but not to take it whenever they choose. Employers can refuse leave requests for valid business reasons, but if they do that, it should be applied fairly and consistently. 3, they should have really clear policies, encourage early planning, and make communication open. And summer leave management can be much smoother that way, for example. Fourthly, flexibility is important with things like partial approvals where possible, and that team coordination that can help balance business needs with flexible time, personal time. And then finally, above all, supporting that time off helps build a healthier and happier workplace.
Well, that's some great pointers for employers, and a good point to mention about the rest too. It's important to make sure that your employees' well-being is looked after and that you're helping them to do so in any which way that you possibly can do. But that's all been really, really helpful. So hopefully our attendees can agree with that. So thank you for sharing your thoughts and expertise with us today. But it does bring us to a close for the content side of things. We do, however, still have quite a bit of time now to answer a few of your questions, and I've picked a few out. So if I'm just going to delve into my little question bank here that I've been copying and pasting while we've been going on. Before the close of the session, let's go with question 1. Our leave policy includes requirement for employees to request leave in advance. So for example, there's a requirement there, a request of leave for a week for more at least 4 weeks in advance. It seems to be happening more and more that employees request short notice leave. It doesn't meet those requirements. What are our obligations when faced with these requests, and how do we fairly approach these situations?
I'll pick that one up, thank you. While your leave policy exists to ensure fairness and operational continuity, we recognise that flexibility is sometimes both possible and appropriate. And the policy provides a framework for planning and distributing leave equitably across the teams, but it also allows for managerial discretion where short notice requests can be reasonably accommodated. Rejecting a leave request solely because it falls outside the stated notice period is permissible, provided the rule is applied consistently. However, where short notice leave does not compromise staffing levels or disrupt operations, it may be approved as a pragmatic and supportive gesture. The guiding principle is reasonableness. Managers are entitled to decline requests that would leave the team under-resourced or impact service delivery. That said, exceptions may arise. For example, when an employee faces an unseen personal situation, such as needing to care for a sick child. In such cases, while emergency dependent leave may be granted, typically unpaid offering annual leave instead allows the employee to be paid and demonstrates that the organisation's commitment to supporting its people. Concerns about setting precedent are common in these situations, and it's important to communicate that each request is assessed individually based on the merits and the needs of the business. And employees are always welcome to ask, but approval will depend on context, impact, and operational feasibility.
Absolutely, that all makes sense to me. Another question that came in was, my employee wants to take a month off work to get married in the country of their extended family, which we understand and want to accommodate. But some of her colleagues are arguing that they should be able to take a month off at that time as well, or at any time at the same. If an exception can be made for her, what's the best way to approach this?
Well, when approving annual leave, particularly in exceptional circumstances, it's entirely appropriate to exercise reasonable discretion. For example, granting leave for a life event such as a wedding reflects a thoughtful and human approach to management. Such events are rare and significant, and accommodating them where operationally feasible demonstrate empathy and flexibility. However, it's important to note the nature of the request alone doesn't guarantee approval if the request is submitted at very short notice, or if adequate cover cannot be arranged. It may be reasonable to decline, even if the reason is personally significant. Approving an exceptional request for one employee does not create an automatic entitlement for others. Each case must be considered individually, with decisions based on business needs, timing, and fairness. From a broader perspective, it's good practice to avoid clustering large blocks of leave during peak periods, such as summer or early in the year, as this can lead to operational strain and unintended consequences for employee well-being. For instance, if an employee takes 2 weeks in January, followed by the remainder of their entitlement in February, they may face an extended period without leave later in the year, potentially impacting their health, performance, and morale. While we should be aiming to support employees in planning their leave around personal preferences, proposals must be reasonable and balanced against the needs of the business. Managers are encouraged to engage in open dialogue and apply consistent, fair judgment when evaluating all their requests.
Again, Sam, completely makes sense that. Another question that we pulled out there was, last year, towards the end of the year, a few staff members had quite a bit of leave still to take, and we couldn't accept all of their requests because it would leave us without the required numbers. This year, we've sent out emails quite early and to encourage staff to plan all their leave in good time, but we suspect that some employees might still not plan it incorrectly, and we're thinking about how can we approach this. What would you suggest?
I'll take this one. Thanks, Matt. So hopefully in the notifications that you've sent out already, you will also make sure that employees are aware of your policy as to whether a limited amount of leave can be carried over to take early in the following year or not, and that's up to you. If you haven't done so already, it might also be useful to remind them of the consequences of not using all of their leave in the existing year and the potential of losing some of it. Sending a further notification out in the autumn isn't a bad idea either, reminding employees of the well-being benefits of taking their leave, plus the importance of them planning it in advance. An employee must take at least their statutory minimum holidays in each leave year. If it's getting late in the year, therefore, and somebody has leave still yet to take, you could meet with them and ask them what dates they want and see if they can agree it with you, which would be great. But if they still can't do this, an employer does have the right to require an employee to take leave on a particular date, again, as long as twice the notice of the leave itself is given to them. And the second point is that it's reasonable to do so. So as regards any extra leave over and above the statutory minimum yearly annual leave, it will be completely up to the employee as to whether they choose to lose it or if they want to make sure they take it before the end of the year.
Spot on, Katie. Thank you very much for taking that one. And we've got the last question that we've got time for is, what should I consider, or even how should I respond if an employee submits a request for annual leave that overlaps with a key business event, such as a product launch or an audit or a strategic planning week where their presence is considered essential? The request was made well in advance and falls within the policy guidelines, but approving it would leave the team short-handed during a high-stakes period.
Thanks, Matt. I'll jump in on that one as well then. So I think this particular scenario highlights that tension between respecting employees' rights, as we've discussed, but maintaining operational effectiveness. So while the request meets policy requirements, as we've covered earlier, managers are not obligated to approve leave if doing so would cause significant disruption. And in this scenario, I think it's important to engage in a transparent conversation with the employee about it. You would acknowledge that the request was made appropriately, we understand that, and that the employee has followed the correct process, no issue there. You would explain the business context really clearly and outline why their presence is critical during that specified period. And then you could explore alternatives together. So maybe offering to reschedule the leave to a nearby date that doesn't conflict with the event. And if possible, provide flexibility such as split leave or remote work options where that works. And emphasise that the decision is not a rejection of their entitlement as such, but due to the exceptional circumstances, it just can't be agreed on that particular occasion. Also, it might be worth a thought to document such a decision so that there's clear reasoning for the future, and that's to maintain consistency and also to protect against things like claims of unfair dismissal. So across all scenarios, the key message really is reasonableness. It's balancing empathy with operational needs and applying that discretion consistently. Your managers should feel confident in making decisions that reflect both their policies and their people. And open, clear documentation is really helpful, and proactive planning are essential tools in navigating those complexities in annual leave situations.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Thank you, everybody, for those questions and those answers as well. Simon, Katie, that's wonderful. We hope that you found today a valuable session. I've learned a few things, but if we weren't able to cover off your questions, and trust me, there is a fair few that have come through, don't worry. A reminder, we will follow up with you personally after the session, so your questions will be answered. Fear not, you're not being ignored at all. And just a few things before we finish, a reminder that you can download the handout from today, black and white copy and a colour copy as well. So get that done and you know it's there. There's also some links that you can click on for future webinars and guides and what have you. If you would like our help with anything that we've covered, please feel free to check out the Sage HR Advice portal. If you're a professional or premium customer, please do not hesitate to call the advice line either. One of our consultants will be able to help you with any of the topics that we've covered today or any other subject matter that you may need some help with. A couple more things as well in relation to HR advice and Sage HR as well. Sage HR advice is here to help you navigate and simplify those proposed changes that we mentioned today, and also the procedures that you can be following. There's a digital e-learning library, lots of additional resources and toolkits are in there for you as well. Alongside that, there's Sage HR, where you can automate and simplify tasks, loads of HR tasks in there, and really customize things to suit your company. And again, just the way that you process things, essentially. We do have webinar recordings of some of the different modules of Sage HR. So if you're interested in knowing more about them, go to sage.co.uk/webinars. I'd also highly recommend getting more information on these products. And if that sounds like something that you'd benefit from, especially, mentioning holidays so much in this session, I know the leave management module might be something that's really beneficial to a lot of you attending. So I'm going to be launching a poll momentarily. Just respond to that. Yes, we'll get in touch with you. If not, you don't have to, not at all. This time as well, as always, we're asking you to have your say. You do get the opportunity to give us feedback on this session and all sessions as you exit the webinar, but we'd love to know what webinars you'd like to see going forward. So any subject matter that you think is urgent for yourself or other people may benefit from, please leave it in the comments and we will design something for you, as long as obviously there's enough traction there for everybody else as well. Any specific topics or areas of HR that you'd like advice on, fire away in the comments section. And feel free, obviously, to use the question and answers panel as well. We're going to be passing these subjects on to those who concerns, and they'll be in touch with you personally as well. Also, you can use the webinar survey afterwards, so pop in suggestions there. Lastly, we run regular webinars every week on Sage 50 Payroll and Accounts. And as you can see, we have the schedule in front of you there. Again, if you're downloading the handout, you've got an automatic copy of it, or you go to sage.co.uk/webinars, and the full list of payroll and HR webinars are going to be listed on there. Our next HR advice webinar is to be confirmed in September. It's probably going to be early on in the first couple of weeks. If you've already registered for one that was put up for late September, we're rearranging that one. I will be in touch with you personally after this as well to email you the confirmation dates of that so you can re-enroll for the earlier one. Now, as I promised, I said I was going to start a poll, didn't I? And I'm going to keep my promise. So here we are. You should see in front of you now a poll. So if you'd like to be contacted with more details and pricing for Sage HR advice and Sage HR, just put a mark in one of those boxes. I'm going to give that until 11:33 in so many seconds, just so people can catch up. And then what we should do after that is go through the final stages of the webinar for today. Excellent. What we'll do with the information from this poll, if you do wish to be contacted, we'll pass this on to my colleagues. They'll be able to send you a follow-up email or even give you a call just with more information so you can basically evaluate whether or not it is something that you think you'd benefit from. Doesn't harm to get more information in these instances as there's no obligation whatsoever. Superb. I feel like I should be playing the countdown music at this stage because we're nearly there. What I'm going to do now is, it is 11:33. I'll give you a few more seconds if you'd like to be contacted. I'm going to close that poll. There we are. Fear not, if you didn't manage to click a button in time, again, leave it in the feedback. We can always get in touch with you after that has been received also. All that is left for me to do now is bring the session to a close. Like I say, we'll be following up with any unanswered questions. You'll receive a short survey again, so please complete that afterwards. We read absolutely every single comment. It means a lot to us moving forward. Thank you again for your attending today, and also thank you Katie and Sam for your expertise and your advice in there. It's been superb. Hopefully we'll see you all on another webinar. If not, take care. See you soon. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Matt. Bye-bye.